Throughout the last century, one of the great debates that was linked to bloody conflict was around the role of government. And it's one of the great debates because it affects people's lives, which path you take, whether you want more government or you want less government. And when we look at the great movements in the last century for dragging people out of poverty, for lifting prosperity, all of the other advances in human technology, all of the metrics that make life worth living, most have been not because of government, but in the absence of government. Because you can view power in one of two ways. You can view the success of the nation through the success of the government. And it is the size and the power and the resources of the government that can drive you. That's one view. Another view is that your measure of success is the absence of government. It is the small business, the family, the private sector. And their success is our success. And their ingenuity and their ability to solve problems, their ability to put capital where it needs to be, to incentivise labour in the way that it should. These aren't just abstract theories that we talk about at political conferences or in the classroom. They are central to the great movement of taking people from poverty into prosperity. And it has been at the heart of this nation being where it is today. The heart, the absolute heart. So when we come to this place, it is important, whether you're a Liberal or a Labor, to ask this question. Do you want to democratise power or centralise it? Do you want to democratise prosperity or centralise it? And it's an important question because it is in our DNA, human nature, to want to centralise things. You don't have to be a particular leader with an ego. It's just that's what power does. It coalesces around other power. That's what prosperity does. And it must be resisted. And it must be resisted for very important reasons, because we need to resist it now more than ever. In the intergenerational report, it notes that in Commonwealth government spending per person in 2023, it's $25,000 per person. Now, accounting for inflation, so using that 2023 dollar mark, that report has that number going to $40,000 per person. And that is a weight that the nation cannot burden, particularly if, in the absence of productivity growth, the median wage is going to be about $65,000 and the average wage is $95,000. It's unsustainable. And what we have seen from this government, we haven't seen the productivity gains to offset that. And so in the Net Zero Economy Authority Bill 2024 and then the transitional provisions, we are seeing the creation of an agency, being the Net Zero Economy Authority, that will have several functions that will concentrate power, concentrate bureaucracy, and not address the substance of the issue that there is bipartisan support for. So this authority will coordinate net zero policy and planning across government. It will facilitate both government and private participation and investment and support affected workers, including First Nation Australians, to participate in the transition. And it also has a role to deliver educational and promotional initiatives. Now, like many bills that come before this place, if you were just to open up the objectives, if you were just to do that, they're usually drafted in a way that reasonable people can agree. Reasonable people can agree with those objectives. But the devil is always in the detail. The unintended or the intended consequences that will flow from that will have significant impact on people's lives. So there are two broad aspects to this legislation about its powers. The first power, head of power, is that it will facilitate new investment in the net zero transition, to operate as a shop front, for want of a better word. It will seek to work with project advocates and state governments to get renewable projects to investment decision. Again, it's a government knows best view. And we've seen where that goes. We've seen how that movie plays out. Like many families in Australia, I was quite glad to get NBN and use it. But I don't have to be, and no one has to be, a technology or a communications engineer to know that that technology will quickly fade. And we've seen that. The government didn't have anything to do with Starlink and Elon Musk, but that's already an alternative to that monumentally expensive project. But here we are. And so there is a great risk in centralising this one-stop shop front that knows best. We are going to, in an area that is about not just other technologies, but technologies that are linked to the most fundamental input into business after capital and labour, being energy. They're the three big inputs. Anyone running a business: capital, labour and energy. And this authority covers all three, and not necessarily for good. Not necessarily for good. The second responsibility of the authority is in assisting the impacted workers in the transition through the Energy Industry Jobs Plan. When there's change, there are those who are left behind. That happens. That happens all the time. And it is important that, whether it's through training, other opportunities, or just the initiative of the individuals involved, that there are other opportunities out there for them. And like when we transitioned from a horse and cart transport sector to the combustion engine, that happened without the government working out what to do. The big oil companies that put petrol stations up, they did that without much help from the government because they saw an opportunity, they saw a need, and they reacted. That's how the process works. It's how it's supposed to work. And for some reason, we're reinventing all of those lessons over many decades. So where did this come from? Where did this newfound love of government knowing best come from? Well, it's an old idea, a dangerous idea, but it's one that the Treasurer quite clearly articulated in his previous summer's essay, where he put a kite up to show that whilst he might admire Paul Keating, he doesn't, in his actions, follow his commitment to the non-government sector driving prosperity forward. In fact, the essay sought to reinvent capitalism. Reinvent capitalism. Now, that is quite disturbing and will have consequences, because if the Treasurer is seeking to reinvent capitalism, again, point to an example in history or around the world where many, many other leaders, political parties, whether they were democratic or otherwise, and it's usually not democratic, have sought to reinvent capitalism. How did that turn out? How has it gone for those countries? How has it gone when government seeks to pick winners? Again, when government knows best. What special skill and expertise is in this building that knows better than Australians out there, who are taking the risks, who are putting their own capital forward, putting their own house on the line? Why do we think that we know better? It is hubris. It is arrogance. Arrogance. Absolute arrogance.
Order.
The other issues with this bill is it is a wolf in sheep's clothing. There are industrial relations impacts contained within this bill that have not been properly spoken about, haven't been frank with the public, haven't been frank with those who either run a small and medium business or those who aspire to, about the extra burden and layer that's about to be put on them. And we will oppose this bill for several reasons. But fundamentally, it is a philosophical difference and objection to the role of government, that we believe in democratising power. And that's an admirable thing, because it means Are we in this place for ourselves or for the nation? It's about democratising prosperity, and there's humility to that. Do we know better, or do we trust Australian ingenuity, Australian risk-takers and Australians who work hard to know better, particularly those in the regions? And so because this bill disproportionately affects regional businesses, I do listen to my national colleagues and my regional Liberal colleagues. I don't represent a regional seat. But that's the point. Because I don't represent a regional seat, who am I to tell my good friends in the Nationals, who am I to tell my good friends in regional Liberal areas what you should be doing? And it goes both ways. I wouldn't ask you to tell a metropolitan member what we should do in Melbourne, even though some do. But that's the purpose of this place. There's 151 seats, each little bit of Australia broken up and represented. And through their voices, we get to the better decisions. So when the regional and rural members, through our friends in the Nationals and our party, are telling us this is going to hit the regions particularly hard, well, we should listen. I listen, and the government benches should listen. This is another example of Labor's haphazard approach on industrial policy. And there's only so much Australian businesses can take. There's only so much. And not every corner of this country is doing it tough. But there are some that are doing it tougher than others. In my state of Victoria, small and medium businesses are doing it particularly tough. There is a churn to businesses. Some will go, some won't survive. That happens. That's part of the process. But there has consistently been, more often than not, there's an aggregate increase. And what we know is last financial year, the only state not to have an aggregate increase was Victoria. 7,600 businesses, on an aggregate sense, left our state. And when you look at, again, my good friend, the member for Herbert, he's from Queensland, they had an increase of 11,000 businesses. And I have heard many Queensland members tell me about the Victorians that have moved north to set up business there. So if you want to have a good look at what the future looks like from a Victorian-dominated Labor government, go to the history of a Victorian-dominated state government. That's your looking glass into the future. That's your looking glass into the future. And so to those small business owners, to those medium business owners, I say you need help, not further burdens from a bill like this. And there are those who will look at the title of this and make the usual calls about who's standing strong on climate change or not. That is a dishonest view of this. It's a straw man argument. And Australians want us to solve the problems that matter to them in a serious way. And engaging in those sort of straw man arguments, and we see it in particularly from the Greens political party, that is not in the interests of our economy and our society. This transition is happening. It is a difficult one. It's happening around the world. There's bipartisan support for it. But we have to ask ourselves, what has changed from all of the lessons, particularly in the last century, where we have learnt that the top-down, government-knows-best approach is going to solve it? What has changed that we think we can flip the script on that? And I enjoyed the Treasurer's essay, but the answer isn't there. I enjoyed his reading his PhD on Paul Keating, and the answer certainly wasn't there. We do ask the government, why do you think you can reinvent capitalism? Why do you think that you know best over Australians? And why do you think we should not, wherever we can, democratise power, democratise prosperity, and in doing so, put the interests of Australians before ourselves, because that is needed more than ever? Thank you.